At 39 years old, the world-renowned singer, songwriter, and performer, the artist whose catalog had dominated the charts and filled arenas for over a decade, Bruno Mars finally said the words his fans had always suspected but never heard out loud. For years, Bruno had been an enigma. A superstar cloaked in sequins, gold chains, and retro swag, he was both everywhere and nowhere. His music was universal, beloved across continents, radio formats, and generations. Yet his personal life remained a tightly sealed vault. No explosive scandals. No tabloid meltdowns. But also no emotional transparency. It was as if the higher he rose, the more he disappeared behind the glitter. But that night, with cameras rolling and no choreography to distract, Bruno took off the metaphorical sunglasses and spoke as Peter Jean Hernandez, the real man behind the showbiz name. And what he said left fans and even the toughest critics stunned. He admitted that he had been carrying the weight of everyone's expectations for far too long, and that he had nearly broken under it. For some, it was about his battles with imposter syndrome. For others, it was the emotional trauma he'd long masked with upbeat tunes and gold lame suits. And for a small but significant few, it confirmed what they always felt, that Bruno Mars, despite all his fame, had been quietly suffering in silence. This video will take you through the full scope of Bruno Mars's journey, from his vibrant childhood on the stages of Honolulu to the pressure cooker of superstardom, culminating in the shocking emotional confession that redefined his legacy. Peter Jean Hernandez was born on October 8, 1985, in the heart of Honolulu, Hawaii, a place known more for its turquoise beaches than chart-topping stars. But in a small household tucked between palm trees and the scent of saltwater, music pulsed like a heartbeat. Peter wasn't just born into a family, he was born into a band. His father, Peter Hernandez Sr., was a Latin percussionist from Brooklyn with Puerto Rican roots. His mother, Bernadette Bernie San Pedro Bayo, was a talented hula dancer and singer from the Philippines. Music was the language of love in their home. It was the soundtrack to dinners, celebrations, and long nights. It wasn't unusual for Peter to be rocked to sleep by the rhythms of doo-wop, Motown, or Latin jazz. From as early as age 2, it was clear that Peter wasn't an ordinary kid. By the time he turned 4, he was already performing as the world's youngest Elvis impersonator in his family's variety show. He'd don a bedazzled white suit, curl his lips into a smirk, and command the stage with a confidence that baffled adults. Tourists and locals flocked to see the pint-sized king of rock and roll in action. He was dubbed Little Elvis, and quickly became a local sensation. But Peter wasn't just mimicking, he was embodying. The music wasn't just entertainment to him, it was magic. He felt it in his bones. Watching old tapes of his performances, it's easy to see why people thought he was destined for greatness. He wasn't trying to be a star. He already was one. He just needed the rest of the world to notice. His parents encouraged his passion, but they also grounded him. School still came first. Chores had to be done. Even the most dazzling stage lights couldn't protect him from getting scolded if he forgot to take out the trash. But through it all, the seed of superstardom was being watered, nurtured with discipline, love, and an unwavering belief in his potential. By the time he was a teenager, Peter had already mastered multiple instruments, drums, piano, guitar, and could harmonize with ease. But he also understood showmanship, how to work a crowd, how to hit every note with emotional precision, and how to move with intention. The stage was his second home. Still, Hawaii was only so big. Peter began to feel the pull of the mainland, the urge to go where the music industry lived and breathed, Los Angeles. He knew it would be a leap, but he was ready to bet it all. Fame wasn't a wish for him. It was a destiny he felt calling louder than any thunderclap. He packed his bags. And Peter Jean Hernandez left Hawaii for LA, ready to become Bruno Mars. Los Angeles was everything Peter had imagined, and none of it at the same time. The city was massive, overwhelming, glittering with opportunity and littered with rejection. For every aspiring artist who made it, 1,000 more were swallowed whole by its merciless grind. And Peter, now going by Bruno Mars, a name given to him by his father, Bruno, because he looked like wrestler Bruno Sammartino, and Mars, because women said he was out of this world, quickly learned that talent wasn't enough. He was barely scraping by. He lived in cramped apartments with several roommates, barely making rent. Days were spent writing songs that went nowhere. Nights were filled with doubts. There were times he went hungry. There were times he almost quit. He got signed by Motown Records in 2004, a dream come true, or so it seemed. But nothing materialized. No album. No promotion. Just radio silence. Within a year, he was dropped. It was humiliating. For someone who had been performing since he could walk, it was the first time he truly felt like a failure. But Bruno didn't wallow. He pivoted. He started focusing on songwriting, producing for other artists, and learning the behind-the-scenes machinery of the music world. He linked up with Philip Lawrence and Ari Levine to form the Smeezingtons, a production team that would later go on to shape some of the biggest hits of the decade. They worked out of a small studio with dated equipment and big dreams. And slowly, things started to shift. The breakthrough came when he co-wrote Right Round for Flo Rida. Then came Billionaire with Travie McCoy. And then Nothin' on You with B.O.B. Bruno sang the hooks, his voice effortlessly soulful, smooth as silk. The industry started to take notice. But even as his name appeared in liner notes and his voice rang across airwaves, he still wasn't a solo star. Labels weren't sure how to market him. He was racially ambiguous, genre fluid, and dressed like he had time traveled from the 1970s. But Bruno kept pushing. He had one thing no one could deny: authenticity.
And then, it happened.
In 2010, Bruno Mars released his debut solo single, Just the Way You Are. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't provocative. It wasn't even particularly trendy. But it was sincere. It was a song that reminded people what love sounded like before everything got so complicated. And it struck a nerve. The single skyrocketed to #1 in multiple countries and catapulted Bruno Mars from the guy who sings the hooks to a headlining artist in his own right. His debut album Doo-Wops and Hooligans followed shortly after, offering a sonic blend of reggae, soul, pop, and R&B. Songs like Grenade, The Lazy Song, and Marry You made it clear that Bruno wasn't just a flash in the pan.
He had range.
He had emotional depth.
He had soul.
But it was his live performances that truly separated him from his peers. On stage, Bruno was electric. He wasn't just singing, he was entertaining. Backed by his band, the Hooligans, he brought choreography, charisma, and a throwback energy that recalled the glory days of James Brown and Prince.
He wore tuxedos.
He danced like his shoes were on fire.
He made people feel.
Critics were floored.
Awards poured in.
He was nominated for multiple Grammys. And behind the scenes, he kept writing and producing for others, proving he wasn't just a pretty face with a nice voice. But as the lights got brighter, so did the shadows behind them. Bruno Mars was obsessed with perfection. It wasn't just ambition, it was a compulsion. Every dance move had to hit. Every note had to land. Every outfit had to evoke the exact vibe he envisioned. He rehearsed until exhaustion. He studied his idols, James Brown, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, not just to imitate them, but to understand what made them transcendent. Bruno wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing excellence. But the pressure came with a cost. The more he succeeded, the more the expectations grew. Fans began to expect flawless vocals, killer dance moves, and nostalgic bangers every time. Critics compared him to the greatest legends. And Bruno internalized it all.
He stopped sleeping.
He worked through injuries. He rejected songs that were 95% done because they didn't feel right. He demanded the same work ethic from his band, and though they admired his dedication, they worried. Burnout was creeping in. Yet in public, Bruno was all smiles. The interviews were charming. The music videos were dazzling. The red carpet appearances were iconic. No one knew how exhausted he was. No one knew that behind those sunglasses was a man constantly second-guessing his every move. And so, the world watched him shine. But inside, Bruno Mars was starting to fracture. The brighter the spotlight, the darker the corners it creates. And for Bruno Mars, the spotlight had never been more blinding than in the years following his meteoric rise. With multiple No.1 singles, sold-out world tours, and a growing reputation as one of the best live performers in music, Bruno was no longer just a rising star, he was the standard. And that kind of expectation, while thrilling at first, soon became suffocating. People often say success is the best kind of problem to have. But for Bruno, it was never just about being successful. It was about being flawless. Every single performance, every public appearance, every album had to be better than the last. He wasn't competing with anyone else. He was competing with his own legacy. The media pressure added weight. Tabloids didn't have scandal to chase, so instead they chased perfection. Will Bruno top himself? Is he the next MJ? Can he keep it going? Every headline was both a compliment and a challenge, a reminder that anything short of perfection would be considered a failure. The world adored him, but it also waited with bated breath for him to stumble. Internally, Bruno started feeling the cracks.
He stopped sleeping well.
He became fixated on mastering every element of production. He spent days locked in studios, obsessing over drum patterns and vocal takes. His team often found him still awake at sunrise, sipping black coffee, surrounded by discarded lyric sheets and unshaven, scribbling melodies into a notebook. This wasn't a phase. It was his new normal. He also became emotionally withdrawn. While his band and family remained close, those closest to him noted a growing silence. Conversations became shorter. His laugh, once so contagious, became guarded. He was exhausted, but he wouldn't say it. He was overwhelmed, but he refused to admit it. Behind his signature smile was a man quietly unraveling under the weight of his own expectations. To the public, he was the epitome of confidence and cool. But in reality, Bruno Mars was in a battle that no one could see, and at times, not even he fully understood. While Bruno Mars was serenading the world with songs about romance, heartbreak and devotion, his own love story was unfolding quietly, out of the headlines, behind closed doors, in the shadows of glittering fame. His longtime relationship with model and actress Jessica Cabon was one of the few constants in his increasingly chaotic life. They had met years before Bruno became a household name. There was no red carpet,
No PR setup.
just two people who connected. And in an industry where relationships are often curated for cameras or collapsed under the weight of egos, theirs remained surprisingly grounded. Jessica didn't chase the spotlight, and Bruno appreciated that. She wasn't impressed by his fame. She loved him for who he was before the gold records and standing ovations. They were fiercely private, but that didn't mean their relationship was easy. As Bruno's career exploded, the strain of distance and absence became palpable. There were rumors of breakups, reconciliations, and long stretches where they were rarely seen together. But the truth was simpler, and more painful. Bruno was losing himself to the machine of fame, and Jessica, while understanding, found herself reaching for a version of him that was being consumed by the industry.
They had fights. There were tears.
There were days when silence lingered longer than words. But through it all, Jessica stayed. Not because it was easy, but because she believed in the man behind the music. In interviews, Bruno rarely spoke about her. Not out of shame, but out of protection. He had seen what fame did to love. He had seen how one careless quote could turn a relationship into a headline. So he kept her close and quiet. Behind the scenes, she was his anchor. She celebrated his victories, comforted him through his defeats, and reminded him of who he was when the world tried to tell him who he should be. And perhaps the most heartbreaking truth of all? Some of Bruno's most gut-wrenching love songs, like When I Was Your Man, weren't just artistic exercises.
They were confessions.
Whispered regrets. Apologies he couldn't always say out loud. Jessica heard them.
And she stayed.
In a world of oversharing celebrities, Bruno Mars was an anomaly. While his peers aired their drama on social media, clapped back at critics, or documented their lives on reality TV, Bruno stayed quiet. He had no Twitter rants, no Instagram feuds, no leaked DMs. He was an enigma wrapped in a silk shirt and gold chain. And that mystery only fueled the curiosity. What was he hiding? Industry insiders had long whispered about the other side of Bruno Mars, the one that fans never saw. Some claimed he was hyper-controlling in the studio, obsessed with minute details. Others said he would disappear for weeks, unreachable, consumed by music. Some whispered that he struggled with panic attacks, but would never admit it publicly. There were theories. Maybe he was hiding past trauma. Maybe he was running from something. Maybe he didn't want people to know how deeply insecure he really was. The truth was, Bruno had built a character, a confident, smooth-talking, always grinning performer who seemed untouchable. But maintaining that character became harder with time. He started feeling like a puppet dancing on stage while Peter, the real Peter, was somewhere backstage, waiting to be seen. One former producer recalled a night in the studio when Bruno broke down mid-session. He just stopped, sat on the floor and said, "I don't know who I am without the music. I don't know what's real anymore." But then, just like that, he stood up, wiped his eyes, and got back behind the mic. That was Bruno.
Always pushing forward.
Always burying the pain. Fans sensed something, even if they couldn't name it. His lyrics grew darker.
His smile looked tighter.
His public appearances became less frequent. And when he did appear, he always had the same line, "I'm just blessed to do what I love." But behind the scenes, the cracks were spreading. There's a particular illusion that celebrities often master. The kind where perfection is projected outwardly while pain festers inwardly. Bruno Mars, for all his charm and charisma, was a master illusionist. The man who grinned through interviews, danced across stages in custom suits, and thanked his fans with humility seemed immune to the wear and tear of the industry. But what fans didn't see, what he refused to show, was the quiet chaos behind the curtain. Bruno's obsession with excellence bordered on the unhealthy. Every chord, every snare hit, every harmony was crafted with clinical precision. He didn't just hear music, he dissected it. He studied the frequencies. He tweaked and re-recorded until the sound felt just right in his bones. His collaborators admired him. But they also feared for him. Producers who worked with him often shared the same story. Bruno wouldn't stop. He'd record vocals into the early hours, pushing himself until his voice gave out. He'd demand replays of drum loops for hours, agonizing over milliseconds of timing. His attention to detail, while genius, became a form of self-punishment. If something was 98% done, it wasn't done. If a performance was great, it wasn't great enough. This unrelenting pursuit of perfection took a toll on his health. There were stretches of time when he lost significant weight. He'd cancel personal obligations. His team noticed mood swings, bursts of euphoria after nailing a session followed by days of detachment and silence. Sleep became sporadic. Studio assistants found him passed out on the couch more than once, his fingers still resting on his keyboard. Yet in public, he never broke character. Fans only saw the showman, the sparkling jackets, the effortless falsetto, the swagger. No one saw the man who had gone 3 nights without proper rest. No one saw the anxiety that clawed at him before every red carpet. No one saw the quiet dread in his dressing room before a big award show. To Bruno, this pressure was normal. It was part of the deal.
You chase greatness, you pay the price.
But over time, the smile that had once been so radiant began to feel forced. And while the world danced to Uptown Funk, Bruno Mars, the man, was slowly unraveling in silence. For most artists, winning a Grammy is everything. For Bruno Mars, it became complicated. He won his first solo Grammy in 2011 with Just the Way You Are. By 2018, 24K Magic swept the awards, 6 Grammys in one night. But the celebration was mixed. Critics accused him of cultural appropriation, claiming he profited from black music styles that others were overlooked for. Bruno didn't argue. He credited his influences, Prince, James Brown, the Gap Band, and stayed respectful. Still, the backlash left a mark. Was he being seen for his art, or just the persona? After 24K Magic, he stepped back, no solo album, no big Grammy push. Then in 2022, he returned with Silk Sonic and swept the Grammys again. But he later withdrew the group from Grammy consideration, saying, "It feels right to let others have their moment." Behind that, many saw fatigue, not with music, but with the game. For Bruno Mars, the Grammys became a symbol of both triumph and the personal cost of success. Bruno Mars' deepest heartbreak wasn't romantic. It was losing his mother, Bernadette San Pedro Bayo, in 2013. She died suddenly of a brain aneurysm at just 55. Bruno was shattered. His biggest supporter, the woman who taught him to sing, was gone. He flew home to Hawaii and disappeared from the spotlight, unable to make music for months. Even when he returned to the stage, something had changed. His energy dimmed. His performances became more intense, more emotional. At the 2013 VMAs, his powerful rendition of Gorilla wasn't just a show, it was grief in motion. After that, his songwriting grew deeper. Songs like When I Was Your Man and Too Good to Say Goodbye carried the weight of his mourning. He later admitted his biggest regret, that his mother never saw his biggest wins, 24K Magic, Silk Sonic, the Grammys. "She was my reason," he said. Now, he lives to make her proud. That loss reshaped him. The boy who once danced for his mother's applause became a man still searching for her in every song. After the unmatched success of 24K Magic, Bruno Mars faced an entirely new kind of pressure, one that came not from the outside world, but from within. The tour had been a triumph. The album had swept the Grammys. The stage performances had left fans breathless and critics scrambling for superlatives. But in the quiet aftermath, Bruno was left with a haunting question: what now? He didn't have the answer. He had reached the peak of his career, and the climb had been brutal. Now that he stood at the top, the view wasn't what he had imagined.
There was no peace.
Just the growing fear that whatever he did next would fall short. That he had already given the world the best of him, and that maybe, just maybe, he had nothing left to prove.
So, he pulled back. Offers flooded in.
Brands wanted collaborations. Labels pushed for another solo album. Festivals reached out. But Bruno said no. Not because he didn't have music, but because he didn't have clarity. He didn't want to make another record just for the sake of staying relevant. He needed to find himself again. During this time, Bruno leaned on the few people in his life who understood the weight of living in a spotlight that never dims. Pharrell Williams was one of them. Beyoncé was another. Anderson.Paak became more than just a collaborator, he became a confidant. Conversations with these artists weren't about the business. They were about the burden. The mental toll of always being expected to shine. The exhaustion of being everything to everyone. The quiet panic of wondering who you really are when the lights go out. And in those conversations, Bruno began to unpack something he hadn't dared to admit before. He was tired of pretending. Tired of pretending that the awards fulfilled him. Tired of pretending the performances healed him. Tired of pretending he was okay. It was a difficult realization. But it was a necessary one. Because until Bruno Mars confronted that truth, he would never be free to create. Not from obligation, but from authenticity. Bruno Mars could have headlined stadiums, but he chose Las Vegas. To some, it seemed like just another residency. But for Bruno, it was personal. Smaller venues. Simpler production. A chance to reconnect with music and himself. At the Park MGM's Dolby Live Theater, his shows remained energetic, but something had changed. He talked more. Laughed more. Made eye contact. Fans didn't just watch, they felt invited in. For Bruno, it was a return to his roots, the joy of performing without pressure, like in his childhood days in Hawaii. His sets were tighter, the band flawless, but the vibe was looser, more human. Sometimes he'd pause and say, "Thank you for letting me do this." And you knew he meant it. In Vegas, Bruno wasn't chasing fame. He was finding peace. Bruno Mars's songs were always praised for their style, but beneath the grooves, there was a quiet confession. In Talking to the Moon, what seemed like a breakup ballad felt different after his mother's death, like he was reaching out to her from the silence. In Put on a Smile, he sang of hiding pain behind a happy face. "I'm sad inside, but nobody knows." It was a mask he'd worn for years. Even Leave the Door Open, framed as a love song, hinted at something deeper, a longing to be seen, not as Bruno the superstar, but as Peter, the man behind the spotlight. His lyrics weren't just songs. They were hidden truths. And once fans realized that, they stopped asking for hits. They started listening for honesty. It happened in a quiet studio in Los Angeles. No live audience. No commercial breaks. Just one interviewer, one camera, and a man finally ready to speak. The interviewer asked the question gently. "What would you say is something the world doesn't know about you?" Bruno sat silently for nearly a minute. He looked down. Fiddled with the rings on his fingers. Then slowly he said, "I've been hiding this part of myself for a long time." And then he broke. The floodgates opened. Bruno admitted that he had struggled with imposter syndrome his entire career. That every award felt like a mistake. That he constantly feared being found out, not for a scandal, but for being less than people believed he was. He confessed to battling anxiety. To walking off stages and collapsing in dressing rooms. To nights where he stared at his reflection and didn't recognize himself. He admitted that he had lost his identity somewhere between Just the Way You Are and 24K Magic. That Peter, the boy from Hawaii, had disappeared into Bruno Mars, the megastar. And for the first time in a public setting, he allowed himself to be seen. No glitter. No glasses. Just vulnerability. The internet exploded. Fans didn't mock him. They didn't question his strength. They embraced him. Celebrities voiced their support. Mental health advocates praised his honesty. For a man who had hidden so much for so long, the reaction was more than he could have hoped for. Bruno had finally admitted what so many suspected, that behind all the perfection, there was pain. And in doing so, he gave millions permission to do the same. So why now? Why at 39? Bruno answered that too. He said he was tired. Not just physically, spiritually. That he could no longer live a double life. That pretending to be invincible had become more exhausting than the truth. He shared that it was therapy, long, difficult sessions with professionals, that helped him peel back the layers. That his conversations with other artists reminded him that he wasn't alone. That the silence was doing more harm than the confession ever could. "I didn't want to turn 40 and still be hiding," he said. "I didn't want to live another decade pretending to be someone I'm not." He didn't call it a breakdown. He called it a breakthrough. Because for Bruno, this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A beginning rooted in truth, transparency, and freedom. The confession wasn't just about pain. It was about healing. And it reminded the world that even the brightest stars sometimes burn out, unless they learn how to breathe again. Today, Bruno Mars lives a very different life. He still performs, but only when he wants to. He still records music, but only when it feels true. He no longer says yes out of obligation. He no longer chases perfection.
He chases peace. He meditates.
He spends time with family. He takes walks without his phone. He writes songs no one else will ever hear, just because they help him process. He supports mental health organizations quietly. He funds therapy programs for young musicians. He mentors new artists not just in how to build their career, but how to protect their spirit. Bruno Mars is no longer a man at war with himself. He is no longer hiding. And his music, while still brilliant, has taken on a new quality. Not one of urgency, but of serenity. He no longer performs to prove something. He performs because it brings him joy. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video if you felt the power of his journey. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a deep dive like this one. And hit the notification bell to stay updated on stories that go beyond the headlines and into the heart.